Hello, my name is Jennifer Weile. I am a college graduate with a master's. I have bachelor's degree in my bachelor's degree in history and childhood education, and my master's degree in early childhood and special education. And I am what's known as a SEIT, Special Education Itinerant Teacher, SEIT, which pretty much means that I provide one-to-one special education services to children with disabilities who qualify. So, as you know, there are a series of milestones that a child hits, and normal behaviors in development and not so normal behaviors in development. So, we'll start with early intervention, which I also have experience in. The New York State Early Intervention Program happens to be regulated by the Department of Health. So it's all health focused and milestone focused. The way it works is sometimes people will notice that their children are not performing up to the par of typical other children their age, whether they're not walking on time or they're not speaking on time, whatever the story is. So they'll get them evaluated by a Department of Health approved agency, which then will recommend that they get early intervention services, whether that be speech, OT, PT. Some children get feeding therapy. Some get special instruction or applied behavioral analysis, which is provided by a New York State licensed special education early childhood teacher. Some early childhood teachers provide applied behavioral analysis, which is a specific way of teaching for children with autism, while others just do generalized special instruction for children at this age to catch them up developmentally to their peers. And then what happens once a child reaches the age of 3 is that they age out of the early intervention program because they then start to attend school, especially with the UPK3 initiative and regular UPK. So once they reach the age of 3, they're no longer monitored by the Department of Health, but rather by the Committee of Preschool Special Education, which is located or monitored or oversaw by the Department of Ed. So Department of Health steps out and Department of Ed comes in and they oversee it. So typically what happens is one of two things for a child to qualify. Either they have received early intervention services and they age out. So when they're aging out, they'll get evaluated by a approved special education agency, which will test them, and they can be in one of 3 different placements. They can be in either what's known as a general education placement, which is oversaw by, again, the Department of Ed, and the child gets into a regular classroom with the typically developing peers, and they'll either have no services or they'll have a one-to-one teacher, which is a SEIT, which is what I do, which we'll get to in a little bit. Or they can be placed in an integrated program on the special education side, which is the class is usually about 60% children without disabilities and 40% with disabilities. Sometimes there's 2 teachers and 1 teaching assistant. Sometimes there's 1 teacher who's licensed in both special ed and general ed. It just depends on the makeup of the class and who's available to teach it. Or they can just be put in your typical 12 to 1-to-1, 10 to 1-to-1, 8 to 1-to-1, or some students, even depending on their situations, are 6 to 1-to-1. But that's all based on how they're evaluated. So if a child does not age out of early intervention, typically they'll start in preschool, whether it be a 3-year-old program or a 4-year-old program. They'll start and the teacher will notice in the beginning of the year that something's not right with this child, whether they don't behave appropriately or their speech is not up to par. As teachers, we tend to say, oh, let's get them evaluated for speech because that sounds better, I guess. And then in November, when the first parent-teacher comes around, the teacher will nicely usually say to the parent, you know, I've been noticing some things that are concerning me. I think you should get the child evaluated. So the parent really has two choices. They can either say, okay, and they can look at a team of people to evaluate their child, or they might say, not my kid, you're seeing something wrong, and the child won't be evaluated. So if the parent hopefully does decide to get the child evaluated, they'll be referred to multiple agencies, and the child will get a multidisciplinary evaluation by a team of trained professionals. So a teacher will come into the student's classroom, they'll observe the child, they'll write up their findings, and they also will work one-to-one with the child and do some skills to see where the child's at and what they need. If they determine the child needs services, then a speech therapist will come in to evaluate the child, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, sometimes even a counselor to see where the child's at. They'll write up their reports and they submit it to this Committee on Preschool Special Education, which assigns an administrator to each case. It really just depends where your name is based on who you get. There's like 5 or 6 of them in Staten Island. And they'll come together, they'll have a meeting with the parent has to be present, where they'll say whether or not the child qualifies for services or they don't qualify, and where they land. Whether they recommend that the best placement for the child is going to be in a specialized setting, in an integrated, or in a regular class with a see it. Or maybe they decide that the child really needs no services, that the child's fine without it. So if that's the case, then the child just doesn't receive services. So then as a see it, what my job is to go into each child's class. I get something from the Committee on Preschool Special Education that looks like this, which has basically a general history of the child, their strengths, their weaknesses per se, or what they can improve on, and a list of goals that I'm supposed to then work on with the child. Whether it be that their goal is that they need to work on writing their name and their fine motor skills, or their goal is that maybe the child needs help with his math skills and his quantitative concepts. That's all done by the CPSA. They have a meeting with the parent, they draft the IEP, the parent can either sign off on it or not sign off on it, and then it gets approved. But usually it takes about 2 months or so. And then the parent, so then usually by the time all is said and done, it's usually about January by the time the child starts to receive services. And I'll either go to their school, where I either work directly with them in the classroom, just kind of prompting them to focus and working one-to-one. Sometimes they need pull-out services where there's specific goals that we have to work on that can't be done in a general setting. Or there's sometimes where say the kid gets evaluated in January and they recommend that the best placement is a 12 to 1-to-1. But in January, there's no spots in a 12 to 1-to-1 because they're all filled. So the Committee on Preschool Special Education will say, now we can't really give you this, there's no spots, but until we do find a spot, we'll give you a see-it, which will try to catch your child up so that way they can be ready for September when they go to school, so that way they're not getting no services. So then sometimes I'll go to their house and work one-to-one with them on their goals. And then every 3 months, I have to fill out something that looks like this. a quarterly progress report where I go goal by goal based on their IEP, what they're doing, how well they're doing, and if they're on track to meet their goals by the end of the year, which is when their IEP is up, or not. And then every year, once the IEP is up, there's another meeting with the Committee on Preschool Special Education, where they look over the goals, they look over the reports that the therapist wrote, and they see whether or not the kid has meeting their goals or not, and then they redo the report. And they make a new IEP for the year later, which we're then given. And that works until they start kindergarten, which at that point they're out of the Committee for Preschool Special Education's hands and put in the Committee for Special Education's hands. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there are 13 categories of disability, but every child in preschool under the CPSC is categorized as just a preschool child with a disability for educational purposes. We don't try to determine for these purposes whether or not they're a student with an intellectual disability or autistic, whatever, where they're simply just a preschool student with a disability. Once they go to the CSE, this Committee on Special Education, then they get categorized officially on their IEP. But at the preschool level, it's simply just a preschool student with a disability. Thank you.